Getting airplay. There will be many things that you do on your journey that will be exciting to you and your fans, but there won't be many moments that are more fulfilling, more validating than the moment that you get your song played on the radio. As exciting as the moment may be for you, it's even more exciting for your fans, the real fans that believed and supported in you from day one. Not every rapper is excited by the thought of having their music played on the radio. Some rappers feel like the music that's being played on the radio is too watered down, and that getting their music played on the radio would require them to dumb down their own artistry. Although it is true that rappers can't find success without getting any radio play, there aren't any rappers that could say having their music played on the radio has hurt their career. At the end of the day, having your music played on the radio is something that, even if it means nothing to you, should be done for your fans. You owe it to them. Love is a two-way street. Your fans have downloaded your music, been to your shows, and have done everything that you've asked them to do in support of your movement. They have done these things because they believe that you have what it takes to make it, and they want to be right by your side when you do it. It's no different from being in a relationship with someone that looks past all your flaws and sees the beautiful person that you really are. Many rappers make the mistake of taking their fans for granted. They start to believe that their fans have no other choices but to support them in every bad career decision that they make. And it's only a matter of time before that person feels underappreciated and the relationship begins to look for a new partner. You should always be mindful that without your fans, your movement would not exist. Always show them that you appreciate them and support them, just like they give to you. Pay attention. Getting your music aired on the radio may seem like something close to impossible. However, taking the time to learn about some of the things that have taken place in the history of broadcasting radio can help you have a better understanding of how to get your music played. Prior to the 1950s, broadcast radio was, for lack of a better word, boring. And then a new genre of music emerged. The combination of African American blues, country, jazz, and gospel music became known as rock and roll. Now, the term rock and roll was coined by a disc jockey named Alan Freed, who played the new style of music on a Cleveland radio station where he worked. Because of the growing popularity of rock and roll records during that decade, the number of radio station disc jockeys in the U.S. grew from 250 in 1950 to about 5,000 just in 7 years. Now, disc jockeys were often the ones that sorted through those large numbers of records that were being produced and sent to the stations by independent record labels. The disc jockeys also accepted money, usually a couple $100 from record companies in order to give record priority. Now, that's called payola. That's a sidebar we'll get to later. In the American music business, it is illegal for a radio station to give record airplay in exchange for money or goods. Once again, that practice is known as payola. By the end of that decade, Alan Freed and Dick Clark, another pioneer disc jockey of rock and roll, both found themselves in the center of payola scandals that involved two of them having to testify before Congress. Although Dick Clark was not charged with the illegal wrongdoings, Freed was fired from WABC in 1959 and pled guilty to 2 counts of commercial bribery in 1962. His career was over. Payola didn't actually become illegal until the 60s. It is believed that the performing rights organization ASCAP played a big part in having a pay-for-play system outlawed because its smaller competitor, BMI, represented the young and more racially diverse groups of R&B and rock and roll songwriters, while ASCAP associated with more older, whiter groups of classical music composers. Over time, record companies figured out the loopholes in the payola laws. While it's illegal to pay an employee of the record station to give a record airplay, it is not illegal to pay a third party to plug the record. Now, towards the end of the 1970s, a group of independent record promoters, some will call them extortionists, known as the Network, emerged. Although record companies usually have their own promotion departments, it wasn't and still isn't uncommon for them to hire independent promoters to help plug records to certain radio stations. The Network, however, was illegally connected with the mafia. Now, the network was a group of about a dozen or so promoters, each with their own territory. Their territories were usually key marketplaces such as LA, Boston, or Cleveland, and the program directors at the radio stations wouldn't add any records that weren't delivered by the network promoters of any territory at any station's playlists. Now, these guys had a huge influence over the top 40 radio stations throughout the nation. Now, their power wasn't in their ability to get a record played, but their ability to keep a record from getting played, or blackballing. They were so powerful that they were able to charge a record company up to $100,000 just to get one record played on a specific station. Now, because of their expensive fees, independent labels had trouble keeping up with the majors who were finding it difficult to compete with each other. Eventually, the network's racket came to an end. By 1990, Joe Icegrow, Jeffrey Monka, and Ray Anderson, 3 men associated with the network, were indicted on a total of 57 counts of payola-related charges, including racketeering, mail fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. However, the case against them were dismissed with prejudice by federal judge James M. Eidman. Another factor that has had an effect on commercial radio airplay is the Telecommunications Act of 1996, an amendment to the Communications Act of 1934 that lifted restrictions on radio station ownership and allowed large conglomerates to have radio station monopolies. Prior to 1996, radio stations operated on a regional basis, which made it easier for artists with a buzz in a station's region to get airplay. After 1996, radio station ownership declined as companies like Clear Channel and Viacom began buying out stations in several markets across the nation. Program directors and disc jockeys began to have less say in the records that are being played at their stations. The radio stations in different regions went from being defined by having their own sounds to all sounding alike. The murders of Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace may have also had something to do with the owners making the decision of making radio stations non-regional. There are other factors that have affected the airplay decision. New York's WQHT-FM, also known as Hot 97, earned the nickname Shot 97 after several shooting incidents occurred outside the station. The Federal Communications Commission, also known as the FCC, began to come down on stations that promoted such violence by issuing fines and threatening to revoke licenses. Now, prior to those shooting incidences, artists like 50 Cent, The Game, Lil' Kim, they dominated the airwaves. Since then, artists that make records with softer subject matters have reigned supreme.